Oh, sweet dev meetings. Portal Mountain dev meeting, in fact. Number 70. Here we go.
Oh my god.
It's the big 7-0.
Septuagenarians we are.
I guess.
Meeting-wise. The meeting is a septuagenarian.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so we are continuing on with our... We've gotten the last 4 meetings or so, something like that. We've been really delving into what you could call actual, like...
app development?
App development, yeah, as opposed to just the theory development. So it's really taken a concrete sort of turn here, and we're going to proceed with that, continue along, and we are talking about a program we've been calling the dashboard for a while.
The dashboard, capital T.
The dashboard. And
the dashboard of all dashboards.
This is from how I've imagined it, a software for organizing and connecting people, for representing data and synchronizing across asynchronously across different devices and all that kind of stuff.
Thought.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I understand the framing, connecting people, because it's always been like on the social. But I always think of it, and that's like a difference.
Connecting agents,
and that's between
which can be
it's
AI.
It's a difference between you and I. In that I think of connecting holons, not agents. Agents being like the word we use to represent a holonic entity within the software. But I think I have a fundamentally different way of framing.
No, I get it. It's right too. I think most people just understand connecting people together.
Absolutely.
But how do you really connect people together? That's when you get into the how same and similar we all are. Really, it's like we're talking to ourselves, and that's the level we want to get onto when we organize with each other. That our schemas are synchronized, if you will. So we're using the same type of reality, and we are in essence the same holon, interacting with itself across media.
Right, and I think this ties into really most software is data centric, right? And then there's a trend now called agent centric software, which is where we're sort of struggling, but we're actually taking a step slightly beyond that. So the step we're taking actually beyond that is beyond the agent as a ontological entity. We are more even focused on the experiential element of any agency, right? So like it's not like agent focused so much as it's experience focused in real time. And what I mean by that is that you don't have like a clear-cut ontology where you have this agent is that agent for the rest of the time.
Yeah.
You have.
We don't want to reify the idea of an agent.
Yeah.
Agency is what we experience when we interact with the world. There's a hierarchy sort of layering of complexity of agencies. From significant to fundamental.
Not only that, but they also have like limited lifetimes. So you utilize agency as a tool for a particular period of time, right? And then once that is no longer relevant, that agency that you've personified and expressed is no longer relevant.
Right. Well, in the moment we can see it come and go. You utilize something and then you don't.
Tricky thing is to think about is that somebody else could actually become that agency. Meanwhile, right? Like it's not even a one-to-one, person-to-person situation. It's more like in this context, it's this agency. In that context, that agency could be some coming from a different evolutionary space, if you will. It's the idea of convergent evolution and the same. I keep referring to this because this is the best examples I have of it. It's the same way how like you have crocodilians becoming dinosaur-like before dinosaurs were a thing. So they've had all the phenotypes that fulfill the same niches, or the same way how you have dolphins
Yeah.
becoming like fish again.
So in our to use our favorite guild example structure of the garden,
Yeah,
you could have
I've grown to love it now.
you could have a pest, let's say, like
I haven't thought about pests.
something that you don't want there, like let's say a mole, and as a human, you may plant garlic or something like that to get rid of it. There's certain agency in that you're having a target pest that needs to not be there, and you're taking an action within the garden to
Right.
remove it, quote unquote.
So the agency becomes like a kind of a garden protector, or
Right.
or server, or
Yeah.
some sort of like a agency that stewards said garden. But the person occupying the role could be literally any garden member.
And to your point,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you didn't
yeah,
have one.
I got distracted too. To your point, that guardian, if you will, the agency can be occupied by a cat who lives near the garden for that purpose.
Fair point. In another twist, just to keep that ball rolling a little bit longer, it could be two people.
Yeah, of course. That'd be the obvious one. But that's convergent evolution you were talking about.
Yeah, but I was really like aiming for like you can switch out
Yeah.
the person from behind it, but you can switch it out not to just a person, to a cat, to two people, to half a person if they don't have the capacity to do it full time. You know, two half peoples for a full person. Lots of
Right.
different ways to
So-
slice this particular.
So our
pie.
paradigm is holon centric.
Very much so. Yeah.
That's our paradigm.
Yeah.
Write that down. No, you don't have to literally.
I don't think I'll get confused
Yeah.
personally, but with that, we can actually start beginning to look at what conversation engines would look like. Actual.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to start not with the garden though. I'd like to start
Sure.
with a more open scenario where it's just people meeting people. Your typical chat scenario, right? Like
Sure.
one of the things that we want the conversation engine to be part of is effectively the ongoing conversation of people, right? In the same way that people use chat now, we want to like kill. If we were to kill a market, it would be that one. To really turn the concept onto its head, so that when you're chatting with people, you always want to be in conversations rather than willy-nilly chat groups that anybody can broadcast into.
Right, and something came to mind. I just wanted to mention this development meeting is, of course, casual.
Oh,
We're here for number one, just you and me to get our ideas out.
Yep.
Right, and
The bottled up stuff for 2 weeks.
this is the way we like to do it, having some cheers and drinks and, just palling it up. And so, apologies, could say maybe it's that we don't need to apologize because it's for that purpose, but
It's meeting number 70.
I understand
if you don't get it by now,
it can be distracting and unprofessional and all that kind of stuff, and we like to eat right in front of the camera, get close-ups and all that. Of the
I'd like to
chewing.
make a comment about the whole professionalism thing, if I may.
Sure.
It's the same language gatekeeping.
Yeah, gatekeeping. It's an excuse to not pay
cultural-
attention.
yeah.
And to us, that's fine. If that has that effect,
We don't
It
really care
really-
for your attention, to
it's
be
fine.
honest.
It's fine.
Well, no, I mean it's a serious problem in the sense that we don't have all of the capacity to convince everybody of everything we've ever said. Like that is a self-driven interest situation going on, and if I can remove your interest earlier rather than later, so that you're not like
Yeah, we don't want to waste anybody's time.
so you're not like bitter about it after the fact, the better. Like it's a tall order. Like,
And we have in
there is
the
a filter mechanism.
we have in the past. The last 4 or 5, I haven't actually done the transcripts up and all that, but it does become we do process these more down the line to make it easier to digest or skim or search for keywords, that kind of stuff, to make it more useful for people.
Although
but
some of the stuff that it ends up formulating as what we said is just so
yeah,
interestingly
it keeps your mind open.
It's like, did we say that, or is that just a really bad translation?
Yep.
Those
So
are
I just
fun.
wanted to mention that before we get into today's kind of topic, which is the conversation engine, which is the most fundamental, you could say, engine of the dashboard software. And did we want to kind of contextualize this with a new term, I guess we've come up with, a new
The project name?
name of a project, if you will? Like, what's the ecosystem like here? Can we just do an overview of
Okay, well, the overarching project name is meant to just evoke a feeling. Like, it's not meant to point to anything specifically technical, but like the kind of an environment in which this project assumes it's in. Let's put it this way. The dashboard assumes the polyverse, the term that we chose for it, right?
and what is that entailing?
You know what? I could have never expressed it better than the AI, so it's actually more fun to pull that.
Is that the
That's a chat message.
the intro under the Git?
No, I haven't incorporated it yet into Git. It's in the chat right now.
Oh, how far back?
Not too far, but it wouldn't be in lobby. It would be in
Oh,
dashboard.
right, yeah. Speaking of which, I have to still...
You search it out. I'll be right back.
Yep. Still have to share the stream and get the chats going. Okay. Alright, stream shared.
Well, it could have been sent to you personally.
No, I found it.
Just realized I might have not sent it to the dashboard.
Oops.
Shall we?
Yep, we are. Still on.
We're bourbon.
No, we're not burping, but let's burp for a second. I just wanted to pull this up. This one, right?
I love how it started with a disclaimer. I have never heard of this word. But,
Yeah, we know it comes from like a mixture of Greek and Roman or something.
Yeah, in the wrong way, I think.
Yeah, like
It wasn't.
they shouldn't be together. They're from two different civilizations.
No. What do you know about Romans and Greeks?
Wasn't it something like that?
So the Romans started their development separately from the Greeks, but as soon as they made contact, the Roman Empire, not the Empire, the Romans essentially absorbed everything Greek.
Right.
So they're like, there's not a whole lot that's different in their mythology. Different names for the gods. That's about it.
I guess I just mean that the etymology is distinctly separate.
Oh yeah. Etymology is definitely not the same. But to view Romans and Greeks as like a different kind of religion is weird.
All right.
To be even more fairer, they didn't view their thing as a religion. It was simply the way things worked back then to them. So it's not. It's not.
Well, it's always
really,
like that. That's what religion is.
It's religion only gets to be called a religion when you have a response to it after the fact. So before it becomes a religion, it's just the way things are. It's only when this is no longer how things are, where the previous
that's what I mean,
description becomes the religious.
So what religion
dogma.
are you in? That's a general question to the listener. Okay, so we're gonna hit a be right back for a secondito. Might as well.
And so, what applications become is just this dashboard, that dashboard. There's no need to have like an app for this, for that.
So interesting. I'm kind of like I'm expecting that if this dashboard software were to be extended to the operating system level, I'm kind of imagining it as like a.
Not hardware though. We're not talking about
I know.
an operating system that talks to hardware.
I'm imagining it as something that would sit on top of like X, I guess they call it for Unix or Linux, like just as a GUI type of environment, like the environment you go into once you load up and boot up the GUI and everything.
So that would be the lower layer that allows things to come to GUI. It acts like that, yes. So it's like a layer that sits behind the GUI that says, okay, not just like your window manager, not just like all of that. It's how you put those things together as well. So your window manager gives you your forms, gives you your windows, gives you your all of the widgets.
I'm seeing a problem, I guess, in that like even the command line programs in Linux,
Yeah.
they're not prepared to be automatically conglomerated into dashboards. Like
Right.
they won't have that intercommunication ability.
Right. For that,
Like you can't just have one text editor that
so
edits
the bridge,
text.
So the bridge between that and a dashboard will be the agency. It will be the agency is like the adapter of that system to communicate with any other system. So an agent could be a human being. It's already a gap, right? Like there's this system inside the computer versus this system inside the human. So it already has to have that interaction in terms of an agent is sending commands to me, I'm sending reports back to the agent. So a program sitting on Unix that does not have connections to the dashboard like this would have to have an agency adapter to facilitate the communication itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So abstracting everything into being an agent is the key. So it doesn't matter if it's like a bash script.
But I mean, like a lot.
It's just telling the.
I guess I'm thinking of fundamental. Like I can see how a lot of things, like let's say Apache web server or something, or even like the front end, like Firefox. These things could interact with, like you're saying, and it would make sense to have some type of translation program that allows their facilities to make stuff happen, like the Apache web server can start serving web for dashboards, right? That should be simple.
The issue with the current operating system is that that's it. Like it gives you access to the hardware, but it does not present any form of isomorphism between the user and the hardware, or book gap, anything in between. It doesn't have any of the. It doesn't have a DNA core to facilitate that.
Okay,
it's just the wild west of programs being written on that system.
So, the reason I was thinking of X or X Windows, I guess it's called, that sits on top of just the Linux operating system. Gives you your GUI, like at its most basic, it's your mouse cursor floating around on a background.
So
there's nothing, right?
So for one, the X server is a server, is a server system.
Okay.
Which means it's not doing that specifically. It's sorry, it is, but it's not like the way you're presenting it really. So your computer is running a server, and that server is responsible for communicating mouse inputs, like you were saying, and keyboard inputs, and the screen information to any registering program.
Yeah, I get it. It could be a terminal across the world.
Right. All it's doing there is it's sitting there waiting for requests
But it's probably also generating that screen. Like if you have
Yeah.
windows on top of windows,
It's a-
some are behind, some are in front.
Normally, you're thinking of server sitting behind your client, right? In a normal setup, you have
Sure.
you have your client connecting to a server over there. This is a reverse situation in which your main machine is your client, is your server, and the program running across the network is its client, sending information to it, telling it to do this and that on the screen.
Yeah.
So it's a reverse server. It is a server, but it
Right.
works
So,
in a separate way.
anyways, I was gonna say that the reason I had that intuition that if we're building an operating system to work on computers that we have today, I don't think that we actually need to reinvent the wheel as far as all the way up to X server, just to get yourself like out of the caveman ages of operating systems.
I would place the dashboard.
Even though these programs are depending on non-dashboard compatible stuff, like its whole interwoven dependencies underneath are not compatible with what we're talking about.
Right. The way I would place it is this. Right now, we have a direct connection between your app and the raw material provided by X server, right? Like, so what I'm saying is that the app is forced to say things like, open a window, this and that size, put this in my window, if connect the button to this functionality. It's really
Yeah.
raw. It's really raw. What the dashboard is doing is like it's splitting those two layers apart from each other, and it says in a much more consistent way of like, if you have a schema, it means you generate data through here so that it generates the output through there. So it's like it sits in the middle between the two of them, intercepts the communication from the raw screen, gives it a nice packaged protocol. That protocol does the hardware stuff on the actual operating system in such a controlled manner that the stuff it sends back to the screen is really, really, really clean and constrained by all protocol. So it's like it gives it like a DNA format of like, no matter what you're doing in whatever app you're in.
I think I get what you're describing.
You're sending messages.
The bridge.
You're making broadcasts.
You're describing the bridge between this dashboard as we've seen it, understood it as an app, and existing apps within, let's say, just the Linux operating system.
Yeah.
Using the schema technology that we're talking about to reach and branch out into these different pieces to be utilizing what's below.
Utilize and universalize them. Sending a message here in this app is sending a message there in that
Yeah,
app.
and so this brings up another thought, which is we're basically, if we were to run on Linux, let's say, like we're not honestly
That's the assumption,
we're not
but-
going to create a whole literal operating system, right? We are going to run on Linux, so therefore you kind of lose a lot of
We don't-
opportunity to be full stack isomorphic. However, you just have a virtual layer on top of that running under X server that reaches down with these translation protocols.
So with Node in place on every operating system, right? That's the stuff that covers the layer between the communication between the hardware layer of the operating system itself and the program you're running, and because it's node here, node there, node there, node there, it's going to be all the same presentation of
That's
the
for
operating
JavaScript.
JavaScript. It's the JavaScript runtime environment. So the point there being is that it doesn't matter which underlying operating system you're in, Node provides the interface to it.
So you're taking what I've said and obviously extended it up into web, HTTP,
Well, Node,
kind of stuff.
Node, like the actual application, the executable node, does not care about HTTP. It provides HTTP libraries to create servers, cool, but it's just a systemic programming language at that point. Like, you can write any script instead of in Bash using the shebang line. You
Sure.
hashtag
Exclamation slash.
bin/node. If you do that, it runs like any other Unix script, so it's already integrated into that. And Windows already has a Unix underlying subsystem as well, so it's like it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, so the question is, at what layer do we standardize on, in that we can say every computer out there has at least this much, and that's what we're going to start programming into. So we've taken that past X server now, and we've gone up into like JavaScript programming as an environment, JavaScript programming environment.
Yeah,
which is going to be
standardizing.
it takes yet more and more work that we would have had to do, and puts it. We're adding layers and layers and saying how high can we go that everything's been done, and then this is where we launch the platform.
And our measure of success is this: that the language that you and I as humans are using and the language that the dashboard is using is one and the same, which is why we're coming to such entities like the conversation, the message. So it wouldn't matter what application you're in. What you're doing is unified
Having
by
conversations.
by having conversation broadcasts and such and so on and so forth.
Between agents, messages.
Having schemas, having processes to address this
Right.
these schemas.
Yeah.
Nothing
so
changes.
again, now we're taking that up into even higher layers. Basically, we're simulating.
Yeah.
We're now simulating the mind in a computer environment, a social operating environment.
So the conversation with the computer becomes different. Now you're not talking about saving files. You're not talking about creating documents. You're not talking about, doing any of one of those random abstract things. You're literally broadcasting that. You're literally starting a conversation on this, right? Like the utility of the language becomes when you're interacting with the computer, centered around your activities rather than how the computer is doing said activities. Like saving a file is something it should know to do under certain circumstances, because those circumstances tend to be universal in our activity.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what we were talking about with schemas
Yeah.
and form wizards and all that kind of stuff that builds in the necessary pieces. So in order to start writing a document, well, of course it exists. Why should you have to tell it some arbitrary place on a file system? Like, you just started using it. It has, you can search it for keywords.
You can refer back to it based on what it's called.
Yeah,
Any number of those things.
That's part of it.
Any number of those things.
Even
yeah.
the ability to drag a slider and have your whole everything you've ever done to that document either come or go.
So
right back to the first key you typed in.
Right. So from this, can you actually see why in my head, for example, addressing Anders' request for making sure it has to be a file makes no sense in that context? Because then you're taking that idea of like it should know what to do.
Hard coding it.
And then you're taking it back and you're saying like, no, you got to go back to the operating system layer and speak its language to do the actual thing. Like,
right.
that
Just
makes no
because we all
sense.
have operating systems, of course.
Like-
But no, like
it's like saying instead of using
he would have meant though that whatever we're doing is compatible with doing that.
I got that.
Yeah.
I got that. So, but
Like, I agree, he probably stated it wrong.
Why is the dashboard not so concerned with that? That's what I'm trying to get at. How it can't really be all that concerned with that, because that's just a detail of something else. It's not what it's about.
Right, you're saying it's not an assumption you hard code into.
Yeah, like, and to the point that he was making is like you can make actual adapters to the way your database
exactly. So the
thing is working.
response is yes, there's an adapter for that, of course. Do it on a file if you want.
Yeah.
Do the whole thing on files.
Right. So like when you say save my document in my database, the adapter is going to be like, I'm going to create a file for that data. Simple. Well, simple being relative. Like it does take work to do it right. But
And this, so with the schemas, you're gonna, when you're using one of these database translators or plugin for file system as database,
well,
you would naturally then have to take the user input as to where on the actual hard drive, because you're talking Linux operating system or Windows.
yeah.
Where now do you want it? So you actually do need that file system folder location of where is your database being set up.
Something that could be very much
Right.
configured during installation and forgotten about
Right,
after the fact.
but what we were trying to get to with this ideas of schemas and form wizards
There's
is
no limit.
is that you build that into that database translator. It already knows that you have to ask the user and prompt for where is it going.
Yeah,
right?
if it's
and up until that point, you don't need to talk about that at all.
right.
That's just requirements that are brought in
Yeah, that
on the fly.
from the fact that you're on this environment.
Yeah.
Right,
You've
like it's-
loaded that chunk of that
Isomorph-
application.
So yeah, to your point, the dashboard, just because the dashboard is a higher level language and everything that works in its nomenclature, right?
Mhm.
So you stop talking about files and whatever. It does not mean that those kind of things cannot be brought up into that representation
Right.
on a need to do basis. So if you need a dashboard that mimics the operating system that it's sitting on, that's not a problem.
Mhm.
You can just create the dashboard in such a way
Yeah.
that allows it to speak the underlying OS language, and therefore you can have automation done that way through
Right.
other dashboards.
And because it is the underlying OS, obviously that file system type information is unavoidable because everything's running Windows or Linux right now.
Right.
So the database
It's
is
running on
sitting
RAM.
in a single file or on RAM, backed up to files.
Well, RAM is like your central hub of every configuration. So when you have a value sitting in RAM that says use,
But I mean, if you
use this
reboot,
bus,
if you reboot your
and you're
server,
going to the hard drive,
if you
use
reboot
that
the
bus.
server, the RAM is gone, right?
Yeah,
That's all I'm talking
not
about.
My,
There is a synchronization going
sure,
on.
not my
And
point though.
that's was my point, was that you have a file, a single file now, that is your database. Within the file it's been abstracted. The database functionality is abstracted up
Or
into
several
that.
files in a directory
Yeah,
sitting on a network drive.
right.
Look at that. You can have data. You can have data synchronization using other mechanism, other than using the underlying CouchDB server, for example, which is maintained by Apache. The beauty of the CouchDB server is that anywhere you have a REST and anywhere you have a port 80 open, you're golden.
Yeah, I've known about that for a long time.
Well, no,
If you ever want to have a service that's going to work, just put it on port 80, and it'll get past any firewall, any kind of shit.
so all requests to the server are completely HTTP. So you don't work with it through some weird mechanism or anything like that. All of the communication is HTTP. So not only is the app, our app, HTTP, all the data is HTTP. Everything is strictly done by technologies that already have been proven and working.
Now, and there is content filtering firewalls as well, which will look into what's going over those ports, open up the packets. It has its own simulation of what's going on, to the point where just because you put it on port 80 doesn't mean that the filter won't figure out basically what application it is. It should have been on this port. No, it should have been on this port, and block it if you want to. Content filtering of the packets. You can figure out what's being used. And I'm just saying that
I'm not familiar with
that's
networking
throwing
too
the
much.
the simulation part of it into just a different area.
Mm-hmm.
Like things like file system location that we were just talking about, whether your database is in a .db file somewhere, or whether you physically pointed it to a folder and now it's a bunch of files. You're still interacting with the file system.
And here's how you
It's
can
still there.
and
It's
here's-
just virtualized at a different
and
layer.
here's how you can make it not matter whatsoever. Always use a URI scheme. So whether it's file : / whether it's HTTP : / it
Sure.
doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah. And this kind of divorces the idea of folders, and in other words, slashes, dissociates it from a physical hard drive itself.
Yeah.
Meaning,
The URI is like it's literally the universal reference indicator, something to that effect. Universal resource identifier, that's the one.
right.
Universal resource identifier.
Mhm.
What does that talk about? It means that your resource is addressed through a mechanism that is similar in every single way. So
Right.
your pathing can be completely isomorphic across everything. What you need to do is, for file systems, prefix it with the correct file protocol. It'll do it that way. Prefix
Right.
it with the HTTP plus host. It'll do it that way.
And this would let you do things that a file system wouldn't let you do.
It would make it irrelevant as to where the actual information is coming from.
For example, I believe you'd be able to end up having loops if you wanted to, going in deeper and deeper into loops, or like seeing the same things come up over and over again, just going deeper into a tree.
Well, that's yes, but I'm not sure where you're leading with that. Technically correct.
I'm just imagining the folders being presented to you instead of actually physically being like folders. It's more like these are the things in this context you likely go from here. You have these sets of things you can go to in that set. So you are able to jump in something that's not linear.
Maybe I can phrase it this way and see if I'm catching what you're saying. Let's imagine a whole bunch of paths for resources.
Mm-hmm.
But this resource is local, but it's referring to other resources that are not, for example. So you can use
Hold that thought for a sec. I thought of a simpler.
because at the end of the day, we need one tree for all the resources, somehow combined and merged.
A simpler example. So let's say you're in this file system looking thing, and one of the folders is called tags. You go to tags, and now you're seeing a kind of meta distribution of all different files sorted by tag or something like that. So you go into like, I don't know, notes tag or something like that.
Mhm.
And that pulls up, that's a way of getting to a bunch of things you've called notes before. That's not through a normal file hierarchy.
Okay.
Yet this is in your URI.
So you're talking about in the way, like, say, the
like programmatic.
So remember how the dev file system works and how proc file
Yeah.
system works?
Right.
Are you referring to something like that?
Close, I think.
So you mount something to a folder, but whatever drives the content of
Yeah.
that folder is
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
a program.
Similar in that way, yes.
So like the next layer of folders that you're seeing isn't coming from the file system so much as it is coming from the mounted system. It's like
Sure.
a program that feeds it that
Yeah.
information.
And it always looks like a file system, sure.
Right. Totally Unix.
But if you're going through a dynamic set of tags, you have a list of dynamic tags.
Right. You're saying that it doesn't matter where the resource is located fundamentally,
Mhm.
how you address it is all you care for.
Right.
So you have a local address space and a way to merge a global address space into it, so that it makes sense.
Sure, you could do a lot.
With the analogy of, like, say, mounting a file system being a way to understand what the fuck we're talking
Mhm.
about. Because that would work. Like
Right.
it would create a situation where it looks like you have one database, which is actually an aggregate of many different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the kind of key there would be to have your URI Explorer, whatever app you're using to explore the URI, just have it capable of having this type of presentation.
Right.
Because a file system like your bash or whatever, just changing directory through file system, that'll never.
I'm thinking what will happen
Well,
is that you'll have a manager of like your data sourcing, like a built-in, like you get to, because it's already assumed that you're selecting like your hosts or like your
Yeah, no, you're right.
where you're syncing to. It's already assumed that some of that is going to be inside the configuration to begin with. So I think part of that is going to be a way to map what the resources are
I like
to
mapping.
where they come from.
Mapping is nice. Mapping such as schemas, which tell you how to use that file system or whatever.
Right. So you can't. So if you're saving, quote unquote, a file that represents a person, but that file does not have a first last name or an email address, then I'm sorry, no. Right? Like you see what I'm saying? Like it's almost like the way frameworks work. Like you have to set up what record type you can even save.
Right, and
So it's gonna
these
block that.
maps. This is how the polyverse is spoken. Right, through mapping of different worlds, if you will.
Something representation, something isomorphism. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's exactly it, man. All right. One more.
Just one? Okay, that's it. The last one for today. Make it a good one. And with that, we'll be right back.
For the first time, at least the way I discovered Linux for the first time.
Yeah.
We were used to Windows. We were used to the proprietary stuff that's like very compartmentalized, right? So you never saw how interchangeable things could be in those kinds of operating systems. And then we discovered Linux, and then all of a sudden everything is a file. And that mode of thinking got us
Maybe, yeah.
on a different plane of looking at things, if you will.
Yeah. It's really weird how appealing that is. Like,
Man.
when you look at the structure of the Linux operating system, how simple it is, the kernel, and how all the programs are just made to be their own simple niche,
The fact that it has a modern command line interface.
and where you don't overstep other niches. If you're overstepping, you just offload. You create that interface and offload to another app.
Yeah. So that's the Wild West that we are actually trying to kind of tame here. Take that idea of everything is a file, or everything is this, everything is that, everything is uniform, basically. That's the
Yeah.
idea behind it. And extend it to everything is a conversation, everything is a broadcast, everything. See, I'm just
Right.
I just moved the language barrier up a little. That's all I'm really doing.
Yeah.
So now you have the same context for how everything is a file in the operating system to everything is an app in the dashboard system. Like, do you see that connection? We're doing that sort of self-same
Extending,
repetitive pattern that appears in Linux and extending it to not the static state of the operating system, but the functional state of the operating system. And the language that it's using is the same language that the users of it are using. So everything is
Ideally, yeah.
Everything is uniform.
So this is sort of this should be like the holy grail or ultimate
Dashboard.
target of computer science.
And dashboard. It is the
computer science
it is
itself.
Yes. Well, in that case, what you're saying is that the holy grail of computer science should be the dashboard.
This is what makes it computer science. This is what makes it a science.
Well, this is what makes computers be fucking all that much more useful, because we stop going down to the fucking nitty-gritty details and just concentrate on what we're saying, when we're saying, to whom we're saying it, and why we're saying it.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Right.
not going to be any of the considerations that we have now, because all of those
And
are
this
solved problems.
Reminds me of the language stack. This is one of the things we.
Yep.
I got it.
It's the same. It's the same
One of the-
situation.
Things that we brought up recently. And can you summarize that again? I'm kind of foggy on it.
So with the language stack, we're going from having an available programming language, from which we design a domain language, from which
Right. Yeah. This is the business domain language model.
So the language to capture domain in general.
Right.
So that's the DDD
Yeah.
stuff.
This is the APS language stack. That's what.
Yeah. So that whole thing starts off with like
Pardons.
your actual programming language, which lets you do Wild West anything, constraining that to being expressions of domain language, the meta domain language, aka condense all of your programming tools to entities, to values, to services, to factories, to repositories, like specific concepts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the meta domain language. It represents any domain. Take those repositories, entities, and create an actual domain language, and
for a domain.
Right. And in
Like,
the context
in other
of the
words, for a
dashboard,
guild.
in the context of the dashboard, that's the domain. So what we're seeing here, convo, post, schema, event, all of these words are part of that domain language that is expressed by the meta domain language. So this is an entity, this is an entity, this is an entity.
Yeah. So you're saying this extends the APS language stack further
To making every domain the same meta domain of broadcast, conversation,
right.
schema, and
Yeah,
automation.
because aside from all this computer stuff, what we want to be able to express at the end of the day is what's happening in people's experience
And the benefit of
to organize in organization. What
And-
is that experience?
and the benefit of what we're doing is if your main domain is actually higher level and you don't use words like conversation or broadcast, right? That shouldn't matter, because if you talk to somebody else on another main domain, you both can drop down to the core language and discuss it in those terms. So bridging the gaps between between different domains can be done by mapping it through the underlying.
You're saying,
layer.
in other words, if you don't understand each other, but you both built off of the same
core,
right, fundamentals,
DNA. This is why I keep referring to it as DNA also. It allows for that step. How does your brain cell communicate with your blood cell? It has nothing to do with their nature, right?
Yeah.
It has everything to do with from what they are built. And because they internally have built-in protocols to communicate those messages out in that way to this system and in this way to that system, it knows what to do. Like how white blood cells coordinate despite the fact that they're basically free agents within your system.
Yeah.
How do they know what to do for your body if they're just walking around it?
Right.
That's how blood blood.
So you're talking
works.
about the idea of cell coordination, and it coming down to
analogy,
that cells are part of systems.
Well, the entire nervous system. So my point there was your white blood cells are basically free roaming agents throughout your body. They are self-coordinated entities. They share your DNA, but they behave like their own thing inside your body. How does that thing get a message from your central nervous system that tells it go in that direction? There's problems. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, it has to have a way to receive that message, and that is contained within the DNA cell, part of the cell, that allows for the exact protein matching situations with the body that allows the white cell to know exactly what the body's saying to it.
We can try to map all of this as to what you're trying to speak out is a map of understanding of it. You're pointing to, you would like to point to the actual living organism itself, beyond words or anything like that, but the actual living being as it is. Mm-hmm. Not the way we describe it or talk about it, but as it is.
As it experiences itself.
So that you have to map these things, and the way, if you use a holonic model, that gets you closer and closer. You add these elements to it, like this APS language stack. We're adding like a module after module, one language on top of another, to have an ability to translate to that vast unknown of existing, of what is existing.
And the top module, if you will, is interactive. Is actually dynamic species, if you will. It itself does not sit statically.
It has to be. And you're talking about the people's ability to adapt.
Well, I'm talking about the conversation engine. Like, sure, you can load it up with all of these rules, right? But it's the functionality of conversing that actually gives it any meaning.
Right.
And the other point I wanted to actually...
Schemas are built out of conversation and broadcast.
Yeah, there's... If you don't do it explicitly, it's implicit. Like, you can't get away from it.
In other words, it's undocumented. It's either documented or undocumented.
Right.
Because there always was a reason why a certain protocol exists or whatever.
Right. Because it made this work or it made that work.
Right. You tried it.
And
it could be as shallow as that as a reasoning. That's how we sense the world and adapt to it.
So the other point of isomorphism, though, is that you don't have all these computers, all these people just sitting there in static space being their own definitions of what they are.
Mm-hmm. You have communication about that.
Exactly. And what does that look like? Like in real time?
Conversations.
Right. So hence, the very first MVP is to simulate the holonic structure in terms of conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good segue.
And when it comes to like the next engine broadcast, it's like, okay, you've sent something out into the ether. The broadcast engine takes care of what happens to it over extended lengths of time. So like, not the immediate karma, but the delayed karma. Right?
Sure.
Delayed reactions. It's a times thing. One is in the moment, The other is, what does that moment present to you with moments that succeeded,
Yeah. So
like that influence. So that's why conversations are broadcasted out and become a kind of a permanent sort of part of the broadcast feed.
yeah. So we can kind of visualize this and talk about the components. I think that's what we wanted to get into today.
So let's
And,
talk about the conversation engine itself
We are.
without
We are now.
without the rest of the system.
We're getting into it.
All right, maybe put it on camera then.
Yep. We're almost back.
Ah. So yeah, there's lots of loaded things into the assumptions that are going on, but I think they should be centered around
Yeah. What I wanted to
concepts.
say is, if you're stepping up to broadcast, which we're not going to try to get into, but what that entails essentially is whatever we're talking here about conversation, what it is, what is a message.
Mm-hmm.
Now, broadcast is going to piggyback on top of the message.
Well,
So there's going to be, within the content of the message, that's going to be articulated. The message is still going to be the same, whether it's a conversation or a broadcast. There'll still be messages happening. But we are going into the content of that, and that's where the higher quote-unquote layers of broadcast, workshop, those are being articulated.
Yeah.
So all we're saying is, even if we move to broadcast and talk about that after conversation, what conversation is what always is going to be there. That's
Mhm.
what's going
That's
to
the connecting
build.
point.
It's going to broadcast will build on top of that. It
So
won't be any different once you add broadcast.
in model speak, conversation is the moment, broadcast is the dream. If you were to like place it around
Sure.
that ontological element.
Yeah, and like you were saying, a
articulation.
more real-time sense to it.
Right. Where the other thing is that I was trying to talk about delay. So you have your conversation and you have your action and reaction in real time, right?
Sure.
But this conversation gets now posted as a broadcast post, right? So that means it has a ricocheting effect after the fact. So anybody who stumbles onto this conversation after the fact, right, is able to read it, create a comment. That's a delayed form of reaction.
Mhm. And also, there's a reaction formed while you're experiencing this conversation and already lifting it up into the abstract and thinking, wow, we're talking about this topic. It's a really killer session.
Right.
It's already becoming a broadcast even before you type it into your app and actually broadcast
That
it.
would be like referencing a broadcast within your immediacy. So it's like when dream intersects with moment. So your moment is about building a dream, but a previous dream comes into your moment to modify its constituency, so to speak. Right? So your next conversation, for example, can be very much influenced by the previous conversation because this conversation is a comment on that conversation.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about representing that ability to take something as a conglomerate chunk
Mm-hmm.
and use that as a start of a topic.
Right,
sort
right.
of
So
conversation.
instead of like replying to a comment in a forum, right, that reply becomes start conversation with a person who said whatever they said, and that becomes your comment.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, the immediacy, if we talk karma again, the immediate karma for the conversation will end for that conversation. Then there will be a delayed reaction for when somebody makes a comment, and then immediacy will take over again, influenced entirely
Sure.
by the delay.
Sure. And the fact that
And the whole.
that it was broadcast.
Yeah. So if you want to think about causality and resonance wakes, this is the way to think about it. The dashboard actually really pushes forward an actual implementation of the
I
fact.
think that the people involved in a conversation would naturally be the first to identify it as such,
Locality, yeah.
as far as its beginning, end, and topic.
Yeah, it's locality. By locality, I mean proximity to the agency.
I think you wouldn't normally have to, or you shouldn't have to rely on other people to create a broadcast, if you will. And that's what I think we've kind of understood this with our prototyping, and that, at least recently, about that data has different views. It can be a conversation view or a broadcast view.
An agent is a dashboard. Going like even way more crazy than that, right? Like we have like a lot of isomorphisms that need to be really considered as a learning curve to understanding the dashboard itself. Like you can't really separate an agent from a whole dashboard. Yeah, it's fine. Like those are like the same thing.
Right.
Anyway, conversation engine,
Mm-hmm.
bits and pieces.
Yeah, I was thinking we would go over the parts. That,
Yeah.
in other words, it's like an environment.
Yeah.
And what comes to my mind first off is a term medium or media.
Yep. That's good.
And I don't know that we've used that term. I assume
Medium.
and we want to evoke complex adaptive systems.
Yes, medium does come from complex adaptive systems as a rule. So if you remember our beloved car diagram, which has been extended also since the last time
Right.
we've discussed it, medium is what appears when you decode and encode. So air becomes a medium because you have like an input.
You're saying it's
input channel output situation.
You're pointing at the medium as pointing the term medium, or when you talk about a medium, as pointing to the map of the thing, sort of, because it's an after the fact. You're saying if something was encoded and decoded, that means it traveled on the medium. But how do you define that? It's through the implied map.
Yeah, it means that we're locked onto a specific layer. That locking means that the only way any other layer is present in that is through a representation in that layer. So we're already locked. We can't go above.
Right.
We can't go further down. So we can't manipulate molecules. We manipulate concepts about molecules, which brings us about the results from the bottom layers that tell us that we've done so. Right? Like we can't touch them ourselves. So we have to like rely on tooling and stuff like that. This is the same with
Right.
any
Yeah, that's all like APS stuff.
so
Like,
this is the horizon coming from top down. Like you can't go to I can't be my bones except through my mind, right? Like I can only imagine my bones, or organs or anything like that. Like,
Right.
every effect I have is a representation of coming down from top to bottom. So that means the top has to have isomorphic representations with the bottom for it to be accurate. Simple as that.
Isomorphic complex adaptive systems.
The idea of medium is that in order for me to like transfer my information from my layer to the same layer in any other holonic structure, in the holonic sense,
Mm-hmm.
I have to break down the information onto a bottom medium using representations appearing at the top to encode stuff into it.
And we talked about this just
and then you
earlier,
have to have a protocol
where
to decipher all
two
of
different places can't speak the same language, but they can discover and understand certain fundamental layers, right?
Right, so this would be an encode and decoding situation in which...
So you're saying the medium is very, very fundamental, and it's shared by both stacks, even though the stacks are different.
It has to. So like air is
and
shared
that's
by both
how
of us.
the stacks communicate.
Yeah,
it has to
it
be
has
through
to.
that.
Right, they cannot...
It can't stop until it hits that one commonality.
Which is beyond its own horizon. I can't control the
Right.
molecules of the air. I can control the
Well-
voice box in my throat.
Right.
It's a side effect, right? So we're relying on a bunch of side effects to facilitate.
But you're
all of
talking
that.
about from that's even you can go beyond and break
Oh, yeah.
any layer down further.
Yeah.
But you're,
And the
you're
more
talking about
isomorphism you have,
a
the
very
easier it becomes.
significant thing
Mm-hmm.
coming down to the point where two stacks can communicate.
So
That's still very high.
So I have my idea, high level. I break my idea into words. Lower layer, still high layer. I break those words into patterns of movement. Even lower layer, but still of the high layer. All isomorphic in between. Look, there's an isomorphism of what this is that, this is that. That's encoding. So we're going down. So I vibrate my voice box. Vibrations come out into the air. They hit your eardrum, right? At that point, the vibrations are meaningless. Like, if you have a third party intercepting that sound that does not speak the language, for example, the communication part isn't happening. And I'm talking
I guess
idealistically.
you're also talking on very low level fundamental stuff.
I'm talking about layering.
What I'm talking about is the same, but you've, I think, just taken it lower and lower, because people can communicate on high level concepts like organizing concepts, and have fundamental like sets of, okay, what are we actually doing here? We're having a conversation. There's a
So
like messages we're sharing.
So the layer that we end up dropping into instead of sound.
This what I'm saying is this is very high up, and whereas you're saying like, well, yeah, but we don't have to think about talking, and it just the molecules are shaking and vibrating. Right.
And you rely on those side effects on systems that work through.
This
that
is also
by side effect.
Past
You don't control any of it.
past horizon and out of
Yeah,
visibility,
You know
right?
how in the car diagram there's an intermediary.
so like there's a
agent?
middle area that we are able to operate in, and that's obviously the one that we operate by mapping stuff. This is
Yeah.
a very high level thing, and we don't have to care about vibrating stuff.
Yeah, your brain does it for you, for example.
Right.
Like, you don't have to worry about it because your brain does it for
Right.
you.
So it's almost isn't worth talking about too much, except to understand that the neurochemical operating system, from fundamental to significant, is a thing.
And so, check this out. Like, in the car diagram, there's an underlying agent as well. So think about it
Sure.
like your air medium or whatever.
Agency, dashboard,
So
the connection of inputs and outputs that make this thing exist or not.
Yeah, so you send your words out into the ether. You rely on said ether to negotiate through its own protocols how to transfer that information. So, for example, air could be considered as a form of agency in this case, in the way that if you vibrate a molecule here, it'll vibrate a molecule here, it'll vibrate a molecule here. So you're relying on that sort of
Right.
medium.
You don't need to
agency.
abstract that, though. Again, like that's something you don't
but,
need.
but
you
like
don't
it-
need
but,
to.
But like this is where it's all coming
Our modern atheistic type of religion depends on something like causality clearly explained in
from.
something.
I'm just
like,
trying to
okay,
give like more context.
molecules,
to this.
atoms, and all this.
So I mapped this out as another agency at the top. So that agency could also actually be fractaled out and extended.
Oh, right.
So
We had the extended car diagram, the car with a hat or something.
Yeah. So you have like so for example, if the nervous system is its own media, right? Then you communicate with your nervous system, and the nervous system is the one that does the communication with the air.
You know what? It would be neat, or the
Kind
way
of like that.
the way I kind of saw the car diagram just now is, what if mediation agent was represented as a whole layer below instead of like between them? What if just below that it points?
So what I'm
down
trying
to?
in this diagram, you have the three way.
It wouldn't structurally change the diagram.
No. So in this diagram, what you're having is a three-state change, a three-way change. So you have coding, you have your intermediary agency, and you have your coding again, right?
Yep.
And then you have an arrow pointing to it saying medium. So picture the whole thing. First coding circle, the recognizes, the mediation agent, and the expresses. All of that is the medium itself. That's what it's saying there. So it's already incorporated. That whole bottom row is the medium.
Okay, that's you wanted to point at this in the bottom right of that chart.
That's what it's
the
saying.
The word medium.
The word medium is a line that crosses coding, that crosses mediation agent, that crosses coding again, and it points it takes the whole thing as itself, as the medium. So that's what medium is there. The other part of the other components of that are noteworthy is that we have carriers and two distinct layers, a significant and a fundamental. So what that means, what it's talking about, is that everything is happening in the significant layer. That's where that's what communicates. The significance of the meaning.
This, I'm reminded of the nexus chart. In other words, a holonic, emergent, fractal.
So,
you can see the layers in there.
So you encode the meaning into your fundamental layer only through representations. So it could include the fundamental layer or it could not. It doesn't matter what the communication is. And so if you want to get a more straightforward example, check this out. I have agent 1. I have an idea. Protocols is what formulates it into coherent grammatical structure, right? I encode it into English. So my abstract idea is not in English. It's just the things that are happening in my head. I use a protocol. I encode it into English. I send my English through my nervous system. It creates a bunch of noise. That's the mediation agent. Your nervous system picks up a bunch of noise. It's the same mediation agent. It expresses everything and decodes everything for you. You're now back to the English language protocol. You assemble the English together in your head. You get to the abstract idea that I was referring to in the first place.
Okay, yeah, oh man, you're still on the basics? Come on, yeah, I get it. It's it's a dashboard, system of dashboards. The
it's
system
important to understand the horizon.
We're using a model called dashboards, right? This is how we have our agencies to get in contact with that whole tree of life.
So it should tell you that the dashboard as a functional system lives around protocol, agency. It does the encoding, but it doesn't care about what happens after that, and then it receives decoded messages back as another agency.
Or it's listening.
Yeah.
For stuff.
If somebody's talking, there's going to be listeners. Yes, that is the idea.
Right. You're telling the whole narrative, but I'm just saying that it's sitting there waiting for an event. An event is.
So, check this out. It's like with molecules. The only way to know there is a specific kind of molecule is to throw some other kind of molecule at it and see what the result is. Roughly speaking, with fundamental particles, you can't tell whether a particle is there or not except by bombarding it with known existent particles and to see what the reaction is. And if the reaction is the expected one, you know it's there. If it's not, it's not there. It's the same. It's a similar situation.
Simple.
It's a similar situation that happens in this dashboard. To exist in a dashboard is to listen into it.
This reminds me of how the economics are flipped. How you have demand and supply instead of supply and demand.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly how to connect it yet in my head. I'm sure there's
It has the same feeling to it, though.
Okay, accepted. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the dashboard is not aware of you unless you're listening into it, because by listening into it is when you can react to it. So without your reactions to it, how will it know you're there? Right? Like it's a feedback mechanism. It's
Right.
not
Well,
it's not like a data entry.
there should always
on there.
be a way of you're basically testing a media for agents.
But,
And
so-
this is how the economy works too. Like, as a demand comes out, this is the demand economy. Agency is through the institution and the corporation potentially able to respond by supplying that, right? So you are just sending out message on a protocol, a demand or whatever, and you don't care what's going to happen next. But at a certain point, an event can happen where supplies have come in from somewhere, and
An
you're
agent entering
and
the
then
room.
you're
So-
it's the reply.
So check this
basically, right?
out. So check this out. When an agent enters a lobby, that is a broadcast of demand. Because if you think about it, the lobby is already there to fulfill a purpose.
Mhm.
Right? Whatever dashboard it is.
Why
it's
would you
there.
come there?
Exactly.
For
So the very first thing you do into a room is you announce to all that would listen, which is everybody else who entered into the room, I have entered said room. So they immediately not only so to solve the problem of like how would the people know you're there to begin with unless you're interacting with the system, the first thing you're doing, you're entering into a room, is you're saying, I am a listener. I am listening to you.
right.
Everybody's now, there's one more listener. I can be aware of that. They sent out the message.
Okay. So this is something that we need to write down and map, I think. Because this is what the program is and does. Right? So I'm imagining we don't have to worry about authentication and encryption and all that kind of stuff. But let's say you sign you sign a message.
I'm
You
just
you
gonna
create a
create-
message, I have joined, or I'm listening to
I'm creating terms
this lobby.
that aren't here. So, listener.
I am a listener of X lobby, whatever lobby it is. And I'm imagining that being let's say a card in the database, right? This is a thing that can be transferred freely about amongst databases, saying that
Agent X joined lobby B is a broadcast.
yeah, you have to
It's a message into the feed of the lobby. Like a notification message almost.
right. So I'm trying to imagine, in order to see the user list of a lobby, you would take your collection of all advertised token cards
Yeah.
of people who's saying they're currently listening to this,
Correct.
and count them all up, sort them alphabetically, display them in some user accessible thing. This is your group list of currently people who
Are in this lobby.
are listening.
listening in to the conversations happening in
So
the
you announce
lobby.
you're listening. It really is a speaking of that you are listening.
In the real world, you clearly don't have to do that because most people have eyes.
And you understand that
Somebody walking into the room can hear you.
everyone knows whether anybody likes it or not.
Yeah,
People are talking.
like that's in the computing world. You just have to broadcast a signal to the environment for the environment to recognize it. It's the same thing. It just happens naturally in the world with light.
Right. So that's
So it's not
that's
different.
called that's a command join lobby.
Yeah.
It sends a message on a particular medium,
Yeah.
and the medium is a domain, like we were talking about a church example. Like you join this
Yeah,
domain.
there in real life there are triggers, and in computer world there are triggers. So in real life, if you were to like really break it down to like just enter in a room, it's going to be this. You've made this motion. That is a signal broadcast out into the entire
Sure.
room. You stepped into it.
You slammed your foot into
Well,
it.
I mean, I'm exaggerating, but the point is not.
That's what made the announcement.
The point is that there is a shift in context with entry of into a space. That shift
Well,
in
everybody
context
has
can
to
be
know
triggered
that
by
your
whatever
name has to
mechanism.
go in the list of people who are in that
Who are addressable there. Yes. You can't
And
be
again, we're talking
addressed-
about our program that we're writing.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to iterate and list these.
So to put it into bed, you can't address somebody who's not there. So
Right.
their entry into that space advertises their addressability at that point, and that is the same concept. It's like here you click a button, there you open the door. Like
I'm imagining there'd be like a contact list type protocol which keeps peers in very up to date contact with who they think is part of what group. You just kind of would share with friends.
cliques.
Having lists of, let's say you and I are both in the same chat group, we both could share each of ours list of who we think is in the chat,
So
just to facilitate that coherence, I guess, or the.
so the way
This is database questions. I bet you like Pouch
so
DB.
yes. So the way I see
basically
this,
handles
check
that
this
shit.
out. Check this out. You don't have to have the lobby grounded to the physical room that you're in. You can actually sub-lobby that. So, for example, if a group of people who are themselves created the lobby for themselves walks into a room of a larger group, a clique, if you will,
Sure.
it's possible to transpose all the conversation between the clique into the larger lobby.
You're talking about bringing the language of what a lobby is into the lobby as its content
Mm-hmm.
to at a higher layer sort of
So in the
subdivide.
So in the greater lobby, if you will, we'll see what's basically constitutes a conversation within it. This group of people is like the continuous interaction of people.
I could imagine
They're just
like
a conversation that's happening that you can involve yourself
sort of
in or not.
official feeling topics or like major group topics that keep recurring kind of stuff might
Well-
elevate to that.
So, yes, but also remember, conversations are agents. So when you're talking about that, so you have a group of people walking into a lobby. If they are a clique, they can enter both individually and as the clique. Another agency on top of that, all of which are addressable. And when you're addressing the clique
Yeah,
as a
so
whole,
that would be
you're
interesting.
actually addressing a conversation that's happening with
You're
them.
talking
and
about
inviting them
in
into
the
another one.
UI,
Yeah.
in the UI being able to advertise or let people know your groups that you're part of.
Yeah. Which falls back to agency, which means that you're back to square one, and you
That's
don't
a
have
really
to
interesting transparency I never thought about.
and you don't have to think about it anymore differently.
And it's interesting how obviously the social media companies running the servers know and compile these types of things and would easily be able to have a high level view of the crossover of who's in what groups and like how much affinity certain people have to each other.
Well, they would do that themselves by announcing themselves as a whole dashboard.
So exactly. It hadn't occurred to me quite like that, but yeah, you would say what groups you're in. Why would you be hiding what groups you're part of?
Right, and so imagine you belong to a whole bunch of different groups. They all come in. So imagine you're in a company, and you're in two different teams, which are a single person. So the two teams enter the lobby, listing all of their individuals, but also the individuals enter the lobby.
right? Yep.
So that means you can participate individually in the lobby, you can participate as part of that conversation, or you
Mhm.
can participate as part
Yeah,
of that
yeah.
conversation, and none of that matters to anybody
So
outside.
ideally, kind of what you're talking about here is, let's come back to the idea of like a domain run by a church. You would have a main church lobby. Like there is, it is the lobby
For
right?
everybody.
And from that would grow and separate and all these other
Leadership.
different lobbies.
So you have your leadership, you have your musicians.
But it starts, what my point is, from the single one.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
one lobby of the domain,
Echoing.
which contains every single thing. And so that's what our program needs to be able to represent.
And this echoes the whole idea of the Guild Institute, always encompassing all the corporations within it, which is what this would be. All the
It's
dashboards.
interesting the extent to which the actual structure that needs to be articulated is for this system to just pop up and materialize, and as in now a church is using it.
What's interesting to me is how, if you just think about it, it just pops back at you, while the entire industry of the system is hell-bent on making sure that this structure does not exist.
Yeah, I get the point.
That's what's interesting, is that the system is allergic to this. So the only way to really keep going is to hide behind the scenes, sort of like, oh, this is a chat app, oh, this is a forum app, oh, this is a nice schema builder, so on and so forth, until, wait a minute,
Well, it's like building Linux.
I don't need another app, I can just make this one do that.
You're building an operating system that anybody can use, even companies use, and put tons of money into Linux and open software.
Yeah, just repeat the pattern on a higher layer, probably 2 or 3 layers
That's
above.
actually that Linux that gives Linux and
Unix in general.
free open source software. Yeah.
Free. I did put GPL3 as a license for our next endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah. My vision on that would be that as an academy, we end up building a reputation among academies, kind of stuff, and that's how your certificates get valued, running courses and training, that kind of stuff.
Really,
That's what it's about, right? If
you're-
as an organization,
you remind me of a conversation I had with the AI, and he made a similar point, and I kind of did my allergic reaction to
Mhm.
it. We want to be very, 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 very careful with coherence not being a form of currency. Agents are not the primary accumulator of coherence. It's their content and the response to that content. So you can't give yourself more karma like you can in Reddit, for example. You can have a shared coherence score in whatever you participate with other people. And that sharing of the score is what's going to determine whether the things you've participated in are worthwhile or not. And the more you're participating in things that don't tend to appeal to everyone else at all, you talk yourself out of relevance. Right? So we don't want a way to farm.
that sounds like it's not immune to ideology.
It's not. You can have echo chambers, but the problem then becomes is that if you're a dashboard, that means you're an agent. So if you have an echo chamber in your dashboard, but you're an agent in other dashboards that find you completely irrelevant, then you've isolated yourself. So you're still not able to push shitty propaganda further than whatever a little clique you've managed to find.
No,
for
I
yourself.
get the ideals, and again, like, it's so really complicated. I sum it up.
Coherence is
I
the most
summarize it
complicated
up
part.
as a web of trust. Think about that. The technologies behind web of trust.
I don't like that term. I'll be back. I'll try to.
Well, good.
I'll try to explain.
And with that,
I appreciate it.
we shall be right
I
back.
appreciate it for its intent, the web of trust, but it falls flat, I think, with our articulation of faith and trust derived from faith. So
I think it's just a confusion of terms.
maybe,
I'm talking about a capacity, I guess.
maybe it's just the way I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
Is a web of trust differs from a web of taboo, because we need to consider the opposameness. Is a web of trust, are we talking about a web of taboo as well? Because that leads back to my comment. A web of taboo is a way to expel agencies from mediums.
Yeah. So that's a good. I think that's the right thing to address, and it feels like it's inherent to what you would usually think about with Web of Trust, which seems like a solid state, an inside and an outside.
Yeah.
Right? You're
That's-
in the web or you're not in the web.
Right. That's the contention I have.
So that's probably very valid, and we should probably have a different term for it, but we haven't talked about it, so that's what I use.
Yeah.
To refer to basically the ability to either sign your own with your private keys, sign certificates for your messages, etc. That if I send you a text message, you know that it's been signed by, at least my phone has been accessed or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Properly. It wasn't just some computer in China.
Yeah.
It literally came from the hard drive of my phone. You know that because that's where the private key is.
But okay. So
And that ability. So by identity, yes, there's some legitimacy to this being who that
and
is.
and this is the problem I have with the concept, is that this is a one-to-one in a situation where I envision a many-to-many. For example, your agency isn't limited to your phone except if it's by choice. So
I get that.
so it could be transposed
It's a
across
technological ability.
various devices at the same time and be all one thing at once. So like it doesn't matter if you press a button here versus there, you're reacting, the same thing reacts. So that complicates the traditional concept of authentication.
Okay,
It doesn't negate it.
Let me
It
give
doesn't
you
negate
another
it.
scenario. Let's say you and I both know each other well enough to know something about each other's private keys in a system, where you just, anywhere in the world you want to be able to tell a message came from somebody.
So basically, I can speak for you, you can speak for me.
At least when I speak, you will know that it was me. When you speak, I will know that it was you. By performing a sum on your message.
Fine.
And if it, or whatever, and if it links to your public key.
I have an abstract situation that I want to kind of...
So I'm just saying that ability, right? Because when we're face to face, obviously, I don't think that you're like...
No, your
I don't
face,
think you're a robot.
Your face is the key. My face is the key. Like
I don't think
I get it.
you're made of metal.
Yeah.
Or something.
But let's take this situation into a further abstract land. Check this out. Somebody, third party, if trusts us to know each other so well that if you were to utter words that you said came from me, whether they did or did not, because you assumed that this is exactly what I would say, do you see what I'm getting at? So that person could interpret your agency as me. So even though the body is different, physical body is different, the representation of the person that is involved is actually proxied.
If I was trying to represent a concept that you are passionate about,
And we're talking about
let's say.
being legitimate. We're not talking about like trying to pull one over anybody. We're just discussing it in the form of like
Right.
transparency and what do you call it? Fuck. Legitimacy, but not legitimacy. Authenticity.
Verifiability.
Authentic. So like if you were to come back to me and ask the same questions, I would have responded the same way as you have said for me.
Here's check this one out. These maps and schemas comprising Portal Mountain, or however you want to look at it, these can all be signed by both of us. And again, this is coming back to that. When I say
Bootstrap.
Web of Trust, I'm talking about the ability to publish, I guess, from a human source.
But that means that any legitimate Portal Mountain nomenclature has to be now signed by us, and that's not the way I want to deal with it.
Doesn't have to be.
Okay, but what I'm saying,
just saying
what I'm saying
when-
is that we're
let's
not
say-
an authority.
No, it's not about that. It's that if I'm telling somebody about one of your ideas, if I can literally send them a file signed by you with that idea in it, then
Okay,
I've
yeah.
proxied, but I've also proven.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
have to prove who that you
Okay,
actually
so-
just
so-
say it. So,
so-
I'm a middleman.
So long as you forward the actual
Right.
accreditation or
That's
whatever
an
it is.
example of a use case of this, right?
Not entirely sure. Yes, possibly. Very much need.
Endorsing protocols,
We
endorsing.
very much need to be considered
stuff.
cognizant of proxying like this as such, because when it comes to agency, everything it becomes an agent to some extent, right? Like it's what an agent is
Well,
is a very separate question from how it functions.
It's our active interface into the facets of the system of organization.
In the best case scenario, the situation I've demonstrated is basically if we owned a shared dashboard and that question appeared in that dashboard. So by both of us appearing in said dashboard, we give each other the credits, the accreditation to speak for each other. That dashboard is our combined speech, for example. So we come into their dashboard as a conversation that can be addressed unilaterally. It doesn't have to be an active conversation. It could be just an agency that sits in that dashboard that you can start the conversation with, and we're both privy to the ongoings.
Right, and you want to keep track of as in a conversation.
Yeah.
Even.
And they can take the fact that we are a unified force at face value, while we can check each other privately without having to introduce the nitty-gritty of like do we agree, where do we agree, where do we disagree, all of that crap. That comes out after to the response to the actual conversations with the dashboard. So in this way, you can speak for another person by being a unified entity with that person.
It made me think of how in Telegram you have, you can have channels, which it's anything posted is by the channel basically. It's meant to be a stream of like memes or whatever, and it's not a conversation area, but.
Yeah, I think we're solving all of those problems easily with just the core. Speaking of, let's use the last hour to kind of like get into it.
Sure.
We have agents, conversations, messages, the lobby.
Sorry, I'm still reminiscing on the last bit.
It's pretty good, eh? It is pretty unique.
It's been a lot of good
shit.
solid
That is the shit.
convo.
That shit doesn't exist on the market. There is no app like this, even by itself, and just for this purpose alone. Forget switching contexts. Forget broadcasting. Forget everything.
But
else.
it's interestingly, as we've established actually earlier, I think, is that it's a progression, if you will, a progress, sort of, along the lines of the self-similar.
All right.
Yeah.
You wanna bring the page into?
I don't know if it's gonna work, but we can try.
Do we need light?
We might. Okay, it's plugged in. Yeah.
That wind, eh?
Yeah, it's been rainy.
All right.
Definitely a change from the last, the heat of the days. It's been like sweat.
You know what's funny? A thought occurred to me that I forgot to mention with regard to conversation and broadcast.
Oh, yeah?
We're doing
Oh, yeah?
it right now, actually, because we're having our real-time conversation that's later going to be posted as a YouTube
Yeah,
video
yeah,
upon
of
which
course.
everybody can comment. It's the
Right.
exact same setup, just more the app actually
Pardon.
accepts it.
That's like what I was saying before, with that, how the idea of the broadcast already formulates while you're having the conversation.
Yeah.
Like, wow, this, like what I just said, this has been a great
And-
conversation.
and that's what I'm trying to comment on is like how it's like we can see examples of what we're talking about like in real time. This conversation is happening. It's going to be a video that's recorded. It's going to be broadcasted out as a commentable YouTube video upon which another conversation is going to be started upon with other people. Unfortunately, in this scenario, you don't have the unified software to facilitate everything together like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the conversation engine has a number of elements,
Mm-hmm. We call them objects.
and these are objects in an environment. Or
So-
what is the ontology here?
So, the word object, and the word describes a set of criteria for what is the shape of a piece of data. So, on the one hand side, you have your object, which is like basically your schema for what's allowed to be entered as data,
Mhm.
and then you have your actual data point, which is like the implementation of that object.
Right, so they go hand in hand.
Yeah. So if you know about classes and instances, it's the same idea. So a class represents a set of objects that all have the same basic functionality, whereas each
Right.
individual object represents an actual instance of that implementation. Same idea.
Mhm.
So in an object database, instead of defining tables, you define your objects.
Right,
That's all it is.
which are kind of tables of
Yeah.
a collection of properties.
Yeah. A description of properties and a collection of the data itself. So the object is responsible for maintaining what's a valid object, all of that information, but it's also responsible for being able to retrieve the individual pieces of data. If you give it an ID, it should be able to give you back the data in that format that the object describes. So it's a double up of functionality. One is more static, one is more dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Very
So
cool.
that's agent. So with that, let's talk about our objects. We have agents. That's an object. So every agent follows the exact same object structure.
And again, we're kind of trying to map what humans experience. Like we're almost on the threshold of phenomenology here.
Yeah.
But what are the objects in your environment? This is this is where messages are shooting back and forth.
Yeah. So the metaphor is like the metaphor being you land yourself into a medium. For it to be a medium, it has to have agents shooting messages back and forth with each other.
That's how you defined it, that there's an encoding and a decoding.
Yeah.
That's how you know there must have been a media. And the media is defined by the
lobby. The lobby is like the underarching, undifferentiated media, noise, pure noise. So you can put signals on it, but without protocols, they don't mean
Right.
anything. So that gives the lobby gives you that space
Yeah.
to encode stuff into and decode stuff from. The rest is up to the actual utility.
And in a sense, lobby gets chopped up into the
Yeah.
different.
So the most basic core functionality is to chop it up into the conversation. that's how you chunk it all up.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you have this on the medium, it means conversation. Whenever you have that medium, it's a message being sent to a conversation, so on and so forth. Protocols applied to what can resonate in the medium itself. In dashboard's actual implementation, that medium is the JSON file format in text. Could be binary, could be text, it doesn't actually fucking matter, so long as it's the same kind of representation. It's a JSON object.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a textual consecutive medium of where you can put characters into slots. And the protocol for putting characters into slots is that they have to conform to a JSON format. Only those will be valid and not noise.
Right. And so this is the connection between Node and schemas.
Node schemas and JavaScript. So JavaScript's object notation, JSON, is the data format in JavaScript itself, which makes it very easy to negotiate between storing it verbatim and when you extract it, if you give it a type, it just makes sure that it instantiates the object with that data, and it just figures out what to do with it. And because it's all JavaScript, there's no translation layers. It's all just direct communication. There's no encoding, decoding in
Good.
that layer.
Efficiency.
Well, it's actually less efficient in being textual, but it's a different story.
Mm-hmm.
So
Cool.
yeah.
So our app has to have an environment, a UI display that gives us access to
All of that.
something represented
In
representing agents and conversations,
Right.
messages,
So
lobbies.
And that's what the schemas are going to be responsible for. So if you get a data object, you can check which schema it satisfies. By checking
Right.
which schema it satisfies, you can know that it's that object. This data represents the existence of this object. So if you get a message which conforms to the message schema, and you check it against its intended schema first, you can verify whether it does belong to it or not. So it's going to say, use this schema as its metadata to verify the content. Alternatively, it has that shape, but it doesn't specify anything. You can just take schema after schema after schema after schema. That's not efficient.
Fundamental going down, you mean the stack of...
Available schemas. So you'll have a schema for message, a schema for conversation, a schema for this, a schema for that. So you check this piece of data that you have against this schema, that schema,
But also
this schema,
you
that
always
schema.
have the ability of going down to more fundamental layers. To
Yeah,
check
if you don't-
against this schema or that. Like maybe at some point you can understand it, but then...
Yeah,
then
like I
you
mean, that's going to be context sensitive, so I'm not entirely clear on what we'll
Yeah.
do in that situation. But the point being is that at that point you can say, wait a minute, I don't know what the data is, but if I do all of these checks, I can actually flush that out. Because it won't conform to this schema,
Potentially,
you'll
but
you'll have a failure.
you
It won't-
should have...
So if you iterate over all of them,
You should have shortcuts built into the data.
well, that's what I'm saying. Use this intended schema.
Yeah.
And if it fails that, just don't you keep going.
That'd be a waste of time to
But
be
on the-
relying on that kind of a search.
But also on the flip side, if you get an unknown message, you can go iterate through all your schemas and be like, it conforms to these ones.
You can try. Likely what's going to happen is it'll conform to some fundamental schemas, but then at some point it'll become unrecognizable. Otherwise, you would have...
You
known.
can you can either get there halfway.
It's probably... The data is probably saying, oh, use X2PQLW schema. You don't know what that is. right? But you do know that other schemas which are more fundamental. You've actually read first off the header, so you can see what schema it's asking for.
So look at it this way: you get an object, it has properties, and those properties contain data, right? You compare it to a number of expected shapes for the object. Say you got a couple of matches. A message has a timestamp and a body and its author and the conversation it belongs to. If all you're interested in are those properties and the object supplies them, then you have a match. Right? So you have a match with the schema. Your system,
like if you're trying to display a message or something, as an app.
Yeah, so if you have a very convoluted message with a lot of meta information, but its body attribute is a computed attribute that combines it all together into one coherent message, then you don't care. Then you don't care about the implementation of that body. You just care that it exists.
That's again like going into a tags folder and finding the notes tag.
Right. It could be
just
a real
became
folder.
so simple to you, clicking on it. Oh, it's just another folder.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, behind the scenes,
there's a program generating all that content.
It's scanned the entire database, searched for tags,
and gave you a finalized answer with with filtered information. Same idea. So it's like one message could have its body directly stored as a string. Another message could have its body as a computation of a bunch of different objects put together into one message string.
Cool.
So but to anything that cares for just the message, doesn't give a shit. It just doesn't care. It's like, oh, I can use it as this interface.
Well, yeah, if you're just like say scrolling messages, like just switching different contexts and looking at messages, if that's your view, then you don't need a lot of the extra programming stuff potentially. You just want maybe an overview, an intro.
So if this message is a notification for a broadcast, and that message is a message from this conversation, and this message is a conversation being started by these people, it doesn't matter. They're all messages.
Yeah, like even if you're spreading or sharing a program, it could have in its kind of header information, if you will, message data.
It's real. It sounds complicated, but it really is not meant to be actually beyond one's actual experience.
It becomes simplified because if you want to look at anything, any piece of data, you just look at it through your lens, how you're used to looking at things, and that's how it's going to look. Meanwhile, there's all kinds of complexities on different angles.
Isn't so? Our conversation engine becomes a bunch of agents that want to shoot messages at each other on the medium in which they're on.
We need to distinguish
and
the concept
now
of agency. Sorry, when you said number of agents.
Contacts, other dashboards.
So that's a special type of agency.
But none of them are differentiated in any other way. They're all agents.
There's an agency...
So like messages can have different types, agencies can have different types.
Okay, I'm just saying there's a special type of agency which represents a human being body. There's a dashboard for that, and there's a special type of agency. It's not just any, because we can all interact in different groups and social situations through agencies.
You don't want a one-to-one mapping between an agent and the human body. The human body will step into the agency's role, and any number of agents.
So it's misspeaking, but how do you point to like having an identity?
In context. Identities exist in context. So the agency does have an identity.
Okay.
But it can live and die without the body.
I'm talking about a legal identity, I guess. Like,
that's a special case. That's a special case that is tailored for the system.
It feels like legal identity is something in a way that the government protects the individual
Right. So you're
by identifying them and linking them to a certain like ego linked market, obviously all this kind of shit.
that kind of agency can be maintained by an overarching.
But I wanted to say that that's a special case of agency,
Very.
and we're not talking about dashboards in general and how to interact socially. But do you see what I'm saying? And this gets to the web of trust issue, right?
Yeah, like
with
if-
how do you just prove your identity that you are you?
Yeah. If
If I'm on the other side of the world, how do I
especially-
know you sent me the message?
especially if your digital agency is always say
And in
cycled.
flux, your social
Yeah.
is in flux.
Yeah. So how do you gain webs of trust that way? There is a dashboard that you use on your device
Yeah.
as the main agent,
Which is assumed
that goes out to all
which is
of the other
assumed
dashboards.
to be you, even though you're talking about a digital footprint on a particular device that is presumed by everybody to be linked
Look,
to
you can actually have
physically.
multiple of them, and you can utilize each one individually, and it'll be you this way and you that way and you this way and you that way. That's fine. Onus is though on you to be able to maintain the coherence that is required for such a split personality.
There's something interesting, and it's the ability to sign a signature. This is, I think, it feels like separate
I
from
don't like this idea whatsoever.
how to do things.
It's
Okay.
Let me put it to you this way. Mentally speaking, the individuals who are engaging within the systems are not the same people they used to be before. It is unfair to have to regurgitate their whatever other length of agencies, because this is exactly what the system is attempting to do. This is why there's a karmic debt to begin with in society.
It doesn't have to be linked.
In that events don't get separated from the labeled individuals, and then the labels become the body, and then the body becomes like the responsibility,
Okay.
and then the family becomes the body,
I
and then
see.
there's just this fucking
Hold on.
tendency like to grab.
You just identified it. What I'm trying to get at is this web of trust idea is actually on the polymorphic side of the market, in my vision of it.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the market. Never should touch it.
Okay, but the problem I'm saying with the web of trust is that it exists in narrative, and because of it existing in a narrative form, those narratives can keep coming back down and reinfecting the same agents who have since then switched over to being different agents. So it's like imbuing
I think you've gone
new agencies with identities.
You've
that-
gone way far into like philosophy, and all I'm trying to do is, and we can offload this. This doesn't have to be part of our work, but just have the ability to know when you're receiving a message supposedly from your closest trusted friend, did it actually come from them? That's it. That's basically it.
How about this? Every time you decide on generating a new digital agency, it has to go through the motions of getting coherence to begin with, to communicate with the outside world as its own agency.
But dude,
That work should itself deter a lot of people from putting this much effort into gaming the system. It's a lot.
I'm not even talking about gaming the system yet. I'm just talking about the ability to know if a message was signed by someone you know. I
don't like that. I still don't like that. It should be coherence. Coherence. It should be like the prime reason for why a message appears anywhere or not.
Well, but this is technological, I think. because if you and I both have phones, like, should we just accept that anybody can say that they're you and send me a message, and suddenly it adds, that message goes into our personal private conversation, gets added by somebody else?
That's like scamming 101. Like, if you don't understand it on the current technology, I'm not trying to solve that problem, to be honest. That's like using your phone 101. The difference will be is that in a fully dashboarded world, coherence would be at play, whereas in the current world, there's no coherence and nobody can actually trust anybody for anything. When you're in your coherent dashboards, the likelihood of you receiving messages you don't give a shit about are virtually none.
You don't think there should be even any protection built into the software from one agent masquerading as another? Like, in your sense of using it?
Yes,
Agent?
yes, for protection, not as explicitly as you're wording it. The dashboard should be able to weed that out.
That's all I'm saying is
through function.
I guess, but when you're saying weed it out, how do you actually authenticate as being that thing which has gained reputation?
You don't
How do you gain reputation on the network? I get it in people's brains.
You're gonna have to have some
an
kind
identity.
Yeah, linked to, sure. There's going to
which
be
you're logging into.
There's going to be each agency is going to be a number. That's the whole point of creating the agency, is to give an identity.
I'm just saying, all I pointed to then was, so you've built up this thing, this reputation. Now somebody else shouldn't be able to just drop messages on the network and have them replicate from you somehow.
I don't think that there was ever...
And this is easily solved.
No,
right?
no, I already explained that you couldn't possibly do that. You wouldn't be able to send messages directly from the other person. What would have to happen is a combined dashboard in which both parties have equal say to the outside world. That's the whole point of that. So it's not like you could speak for me without my knowledge of this. I get it.
Let's say you have access to someone else's technology and you inject a bunch of cards into their database.
I can't
which
solve
say
it.
that you said something.
I can't solve the physical problems.
It's already solved. I'm saying they're not signed. You would have had to sign them with your private key. That's a simple solution. It's already solved.
There's no problem in signing anything with a private key. Is what I'm trying to.
You sounded allergic to
No, I'm allergic to
cryptographically.
I'm allergic to
shit.
using a one-to-one relationship with agency to the human body. Because me today is not me tomorrow, and me the day after tomorrow could be me today again.
But I just mean
Do you know what I'm saying?
In the moment. It's usually connected to your device, that people trust that you're you. If I send you a message from my phone, you think it came from me because it would have had to be me typing in my password, right?
Yeah.
Somebody probably didn't just steal my phone and now they're texting you, because they would have to keep unlocking it, which they can't do, right?
Again, you interact as an agent by having a dashboard. That dashboard is your cryptographic key. You can have multiple dashboards on your device, each one supplying their own key as a different agent.
Yeah, okay, so you're saying
the software itself is your key.
The dashboard as an object that you're using, the software is primarily coming into a world with an identity sort of built into it.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry I wasn't clear about it initially, but the fact that you have that app, that app code, that installation of, you can have multiple dashboards installed,
right?
But each installation
and
itself serves as an agent.
The typical way that agent
permanent
is unique is its private key.
So if you get rid of this agent, guess what? Right? Like, so part of this is it's going to be very, very hard to maintain the coherence of multiple agents properly. So right there, it's a deterrent.
It's fine if you drop a key and start a new one.
Yes. Like, you can restart your reputation, sure. You can do this online right now.
People forget their credentials, like to unlock the private key. Too
Yeah.
bad, you got to start over. That's your problem.
That's all fine. That's actually expected. So yeah, I think I was.
I just tried to.
missed answering
I tried to bring that in because
I missed answering
I'm
your
trying to
question
connect the
because
technologies, right?
because I didn't realize that this wasn't clear. So
This is
the
what I
app-
tried pointing at with Web of Trust.
Each-
that have we said private.
Each instantiation
Private
of
public
an
keys.
active app that accesses any other dashboard is an agency that lives across them. So it's a permanent key. Each installation is a permanent key.
Installation. You're talking about a person installs something.
So
You or I installs the app onto the
so
phone.
so you know how you can create a class which describes a bunch of objects, but then you can create a bunch of those objects in different ways based on what the class allows you to do.
Yeah, that's
So you
what
have
class-
so you have a unified point of code, and then you have like your individual specific cases. That's
It's like
what,
constraint and then the possibility.
so the dashboard itself acts as like the unified way to install an app. You can install it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different times as different app names in your operating system, all of which are just dashboard. All of which are becoming their own
Why?
agents.
For what?
Because you can. There's no I'm not saying you should. I'm saying there's nothing to stop you from doing that.
Well, there should be a creation environment for outlining different dashboards, having different purposes.
Sure. Yes.
Different
That's
organization.
that's more like which dashboard you install. My grander point is that you're actually installing one application all over and over and over again. It's just that they function all differently.
Right, and this is the self-similar progression again. We're just pushing that upwards.
So you don't have any other app, but just
And this
dashboard
is
this,
the
dashboard
ultimate
that.
methodological purpose of computer science, to progress that.
The holy grail is to
that
have a
meta.
dashboard to control all of those installations. Because then,
Right.
you
Yeah.
have like a fully functional operating system in every sense. Like there's nothing your phone can't do at that point, because it doesn't matter. It's just gonna run a dashboard, and it's gonna switch context between them, and whichever dashboard you land on is gonna do that whatever activity you want it to.
Hmm. And you don't have to set it up. Just automatically, everything.
This app works this way, so it works this way there, and there, and there, and there.
Oh yeah.
So, here's an idea for how you would have two different agencies. One for work, one for family.
Sure.
You are one human body, you have two different dashboard identities. One is professional, one is entirely family related.
Of course.
And
That's a good standard example.
And another one for your garden. And then you don't
Yeah.
have to mix what's happening in this agency with that agency either. They can also
And
live
so
separately.
again, I'm reminded of the concept of having a map for the things that we do in life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's a life simulator. It's a simulator. The polyverse is a simulation
Of the multiverse.
Sure. Is that for real?
Well, what do you think the
Explain
idea
that.
came from?
What do you mean by that?
Well,
The polyverse is a
Polyverse-
simulation of the multiverse
so the polyverse
as
was
a product.
coined as a term to
Should
capture...
we read?
No.
Do you want to read
Stop
it?
it. Stop it.
Okay. It's just us.
They can read it. It's fun. But yeah, the polyverse is a term that was coined from the idea of narratological flow of things. So narratives combining with narratives, mismatched, and all of that, and condensed into a single meta narrative that is essentially obfuscated with itself. It doesn't understand itself. It has no self-reference.
Typically,
Right, and
currently, typically.
entropy-wise suggests that it's the most common case, which is means typically.
I'm thinking of tables in which polyverse appears, and I know you've evoked past the top horizon into narrative in general, expanding out into the three of them.
Narrative,
There's
hyper-narrative,
two
meta-narrative.
Right, and then there's a correlation of something polyverse.
So it paints a similar picture.
I forget where that table is, though. The polyverse table.
It paints a similar picture in which causality is actually fractured into all of its different potentials. So if the narrative goes this way, that's the experiential universe. If it goes that way, and between those forks, it's kind of like either or, right? Like you have a certain element of uncertainty in which way any particular narrative goes. And so it's more like a metaphorical universe that is a multiverse. So
Not
it exists
totally sure, but it sounded like you were pointing at like archetypal.
That's what narratives are about. So when you create a narratives, it's never going to be about specifics. It's going to be about the archetypes of the specifics, right? In the same way, like when you're talking about people, you're not able to take any one individual person into account. You have to categorize them as a whole, as a set, right? Like that chunking situation.
Yep.
That happens in the narrative sense, right? And all of these ways of different chunking and all of these different ways of approaching it in the hyper narrative could be completely contradictory in the meta narrative when it's all put together.
Check this out.
So when your narratives are all disconnected from each other and whatnot, it has a sense of the polyverse. Like there's multiplicity in the oneness of it. So it's leading with the same idea that physics go into, in that you can interpret the paths of particles in multiple different ways, and applying the same idea with narrative, in that it could go in one of multiple different ways. So while not the same concept,
This is
it's
actually
very related.
Sorry, this is part of the neural operating system table. Isn't there one that has this on it? Maybe not. I'm thinking of maybe particle is how they connect. The
What?
neurochemical operating system.
Oh, absolutely. How it's, yeah. But once you have nerves, you don't care about particles. You care about nervous pathways.
Right?
So it doesn't matter anymore, because anything that can facilitate nervous pathways, including an AI network, could fulfill the job. Most of those AI networks, though, miss a lot of the miss a lot of the
Context, like usual.
so the kind
Yeah,
of
that
jump
polyverse is there,
they
man.
have a kind of a jump from symbolic
I forgot.
to this, they have a jump from symbolic right to the abstract without any of the mimetic and mediational interplay that we are suggesting.
What does? I didn't follow like where your thoughts are coming from.
So
that you're
AI
connecting this layer and that layer.
so
AI.
so AI, a synthetic neural system.
Yeah, you're saying it basically skips the experience that a human would have to investigate or think about.
In particular, they're skipping layers 6 and 7. They're jumping from symbolic to abstract. So symbol is the whatever it is representing,
Mm-hmm.
and so it has none of that nuance that memetics would give it in terms of like how do you incorporate this symbol now
Yeah. So it
into
sounds
the
like
story that's ongoing now.
its window is permanently shifted incorrectly. That's an interesting
for the
critique
same
of
reason
AI.
for our window is shifted incorrectly.
Yeah.
We're also
so
doing this.
in other words, people we typically make the same mistake that AI would make in all of its formulations.
Forgetting the mediational artifacts that are the expressions of said symbols,
Where they came from. That's important to know how we came to know what we know.
or what they assemble into.
Because
So,
it's memories, right?
So the question is like, why is this set of symbols in my head create this artifact, and in your head that artifact? Like that distinction is gone. Because if this is that, automatically in the abstract, you're not questioning why do I have this set of artifacts.
You're not,
Like why did I build that abstraction
not
to
able
begin with?
to connect with another perspective.
It's basically taking simple abstract concept without giving the nuances to like, in this context, are the memetics working towards that abstract concept, or is it just a contradiction with that abstract concept? Right? Like, it's basically looking at propaganda as if it were reality. Jumping like the entire fucking boat. Like,
Right. So that that sounds good to me as a critique of AI, that it continually, or it can't help but reify everything.
the current
It doesn't have the
situation,
way
yeah.
out of reification. It doesn't have senses of its context typically, and these things could be addressed and all that.
Mhm.
But that's not how it is right now.
Yeah, the jump from symbolic straight into the abstract is incredibly problematic because without the nuances that could be happening in between, it's essentially like being pre-programmed. Like, if you're mentally given a symbol and it automatically means this,
Right.
that you're brainwashed
Because it's from your data set.
with zero
As it's
criticism.
Your data set was processed, this is what came out of it, now you follow that.
Yeah, there's zero criticism in that process. There is your window into why brainwashing is happening.
Interesting.
Speaking
and there is
of-
definite correlation or connection.
Do you mind putting on the affect chart? I want to show you
Sure.
something.
How to wash your
It's
brain.
it's a critique. No, it's a critique on the problem we have with the model. Like, do you remember me mentioning that we kind of step over people's feelings and just like, your side.
Neither
is
of us, both of us, for potentially different reasons.
Yeah.
Which is kind of
No, that's not the
interesting.
same thing. But my point is like we will have like an insensitive sort of approach of saying, "Hey, wait a minute, that's just an opposite." Oh, other one, not this one.
Not the brain chart.
No.
Oh, the affect.
Affect, yeah. So that tendency can actually be captured by that chart. Is why I'm pointing to it. I want you to notice something. Right there.
Coming right up.
Yeah, I want you to notice something. So go down the isomorphism side of it towards altruism.
Oops. These are all very relevant charts.
Are we on?
Almost. There we go. Just wanted to drag it, but that was being a pain.
All right. So, I'm just, it's a small point, but very, very useful for us.
Okay, we're following what?
The altruism.
Altruism. Yep.
And then follow the line to conceitedness from altruism.
Sorry.
Okay, get rid of that.
Here's my pointer from altruism.
Yeah. From altruism, follow the line, conceitedness.
Yep, we can see over here conceitedness.
And what does that line represent? There's a line that comes
From here to here.
Yeah, so there's a line that comes out of that line, pointing to dysmorphism. See
Right.
that?
Up here, yep.
So, this is a crucial point to understand about talking about the model and talking about oppositeness and talking about everything else. The model is in the same boat of I'm better than you
Right.
when it is formulated that way. So every time you actually say, nah, y'all both wrong, this is the way, that's actually
Right.
jumping back into the same problem
Right,
that
right.
they exhibit.
You're pointing to the same problem that all guides must deal with
Mm-hmm.
in what appears to be charlatanism.
Yeah, and it also speaks volumes about our insensitivity sometimes. What it points to is that we're presenting things in a conceited way, where we're presenting
Right.
our system is better than your system. And so that needs to be taken into account as far as a conversation goes, and how, and that can be used to actually not do that sometimes and be like, okay, if I take this approach, I'm landing into my own dysmorphic description of the system that I'm trying to present to the other side. How do you avoid that?
I like the ability to concede that your speech is conceited and sounds charlatanistic. Even
Even with regard to the model.
to model that in
So-
the interaction can be powerful.
And
too.
even with the pointers towards the altruism and how perfect all of that is, how it avoids all of these issues, as soon as you turn that altruism into a conceited presentation,
right,
it goes right back into pain, pleasure, responses,
by
and
being
narratives.
linked with a line, no arrows. Altruism and conceitedness. It
So-
kind of shows it as two sides of a coin.
So when you have a line that does not have arrows, the entire purpose of that is to say, when you have those two things
Together,
combined,
they go to the other.
there's another
line
arrow
off.
that points to another concept.
Right.
Yeah. So
the
together,
fact that they can combine, though.
yeah, that's what it's saying. They can combine together. You can take your altruism that your sympathetic, empathetic response, and then turn it right back around into being a conceited piece of information into this is better than that. And as soon as that's done, all of the affect no longer becomes affect plain and simple. It becomes literal pain, literal pleasure, driving a further narrative of failure of this, that, or the other, driving another set of narratives about one's stance in their favorite religion, for example, and leading to self-doubt and again self-comparison and against further dysmorphism.
So the entire right side of this chart here is really hinging on
Conceit.
the connection of conceit here.
No, because you can have conceit and no altruism. So the entire left side of the chart could disappear entirely.
Right, obviously, yeah.
But when it does appear, it's not immune.
So what we were just talking about is a pitfall, if you will, of feeling holier than thou,
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. That's so great that I'm sharing stuff with people. Look at me. Take your photos and...
Or look at how I'm solving your problems.
Right. So, on the right side here, we see typically with society, with the ego, the way it's installed as the agent of the market, in direct contrast with the polymorphism, in which the holon is connected as an individual with the parents, the family is one kind of thing. This is how you're born. Your mother gives
Agency
you
is
life.
ephemeral.
And we're kind of translated into society, civilization.
Immersion,
Right.
in an emergent fashion, yeah.
And over time, we slowly identify more and more with our market identity,
Yeah.
which is I am my name, I take on debt.
And it's also a great pointer to the fact that no matter how careful you are with opening up the left side of this diagram, assuming like only the right side exists in that context, no matter how careful you are in opening that left side of the diagram, that conceit element of it, right, always needs to warn you effectively of that you're not done with the right hand side. And it's really like mastery and grand mastery that's really is involved in taking conceit out of the picture. The point really being is that we're not special in that we have a special message, so to speak. Right? It can be just as what do you call it? Corrupted as right from the start. This is showing you how, really.
Mm-hmm.
We never really got into the rest of the components of the
Not yet,
conversation agent. So we have
and
agents.
yet here we are with mere minutes left.
All right, speedrun. Agents.
And this is the environment of our program,
They exist in a lobby.
the conversation engine portion of it.
So if you're an agent in a lobby, every other agent can hear everything you say.
And we
Point
just
number one.
debated a lot about what is an agent, what are special types of agents,
Yeah.
etc.
Conversation can be started between any number of agents. Point. They are started. They have a lifetime. They are ended.
Right.
Conversations act as a container for a bunch of messages by the participants of said conversation.
And they only really count as conversation once they are ended. They can only be ended after a thing has kind of happened and been identified as a thing.
So a conversation
Start
ends.
to finish.
The conversation ends when the second last person leaves it.
That's sounds like a more fundamental
It's organic.
action, having the significance of ending the conversation.
Yeah. So
If there's nobody left to talk, it's one person. Is it ended?
so
Do they have to leave it too?
yeah, that's the gist of all of the different things, different components that we're looking at. So messages can be in a conversation or not. Messages not in a conversation are thrown into the main lobby as is. A message can be in more than one conversation. And
That's tough.
and one can have more than one
How the fuck do you
conversation with the
manage
same
that?
people. Slowly.
One message in more than one conversation, though.
So it's
How
like,
do you guarantee that that's relevant to both?
so you know how in Telegram,
I guess.
So
No, you're right.
you know in Telegram you can select how many messages you want to forward. And
No,
then the
But
forwarding
I mean,
message.
what I was thinking is it could be a music festival that multiple groups that you know of are interested in, potentially.
Yeah, it's the same idea. Well, the point being is like, you know how you can reply to multiple messages by forwarding them in Telegram? Imagine doing that. Like you go to your lobby, you select everything from every conversation you want, and you hit reply, and that message appears in all of those conversations.
Sure, there's that too. That's another automatic path
And
to
only once in the log.
to that structure, correct? And with that, we'll be right back. Everybody should notice
Right.
how
So-
their experience informs the structure of the app.
Right. So did you notice that, for example, I didn't have to go into like a ton of detail about saying, okay, an agent starts a conversation. Conversations end. Conversations end when the second last person leaves them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sounds
all of that kind
intuitive.
of stuff.
When the last person leaves them,
Well,
because
what are they gonna do? Talk to themselves?
yeah,
I mean, sure, they can send messages, but what would the interface say to them? Hey, nobody's left here. Do you
Oh,
want?
wait,
do you
no,
want
no,
to
no.
end this now?
no, you're right actually, because when you go to create a conversation, you must select somebody else.
Right, and as soon as the whatever somebody else is gone, every last one of them is gone. That conversation has come to its natural conclusion.
Now that's if you beforehand select people to create a particular topic conversation. If you're just sending messages into a lobby and you later on decide that, well, actually this conversation started back at this exact time, I think there has to be room in the app for maybe that. Because you can start talking without knowing what you're talking about. That's what a lobby is about. Sort of. Isn't it? It can be.
So you are not coaxed into.
Like you haven't
you
differentiated.
You don't have to start conversations.
You don't have
if
to
don't.
differentiate at all. You can just be in the lobby of
And
the
just talk.
of the root
And just talk.
domain
They'll
of
still
the
see
domain.
it. They'll
The
still-
root of the domain. You're there talking.
If you reply to somebody's message in somebody's conversation just in the lobby, that person is still gonna see it. Like they're gonna get a notification that, hey, this message you said over here got replied to by
Sure.
this person
Interesting.
over there.
And that'd be an interesting way to self-censor, not self-censor, but
Be aware, regulate.
regulate and sort of classify of coherence. You're just kind of admitting that this is a lobby shot. You don't need to add to the conversation.
Exactly. And if you're really, 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 really interested in addressing the person who said whatever they said, you start that conversation. Again, everybody in the lobby is going to see that, so the people participating in the previous conversation can see it as well. Because in the lobby, you see every conversation. So if somebody's talking, and then then they start responding to somebody else about what they're talking about in the lobby, you'll see it all real time.
The interface is tough.
Oh yeah, it's there. That doesn't exist. It
Like,
has never
a
existed.
good portion of it is just abstract information, like selecting tags that you're the context. So you have a context pile of tags,
Into which everything is related. Yeah.
and you'd have at least half the screen area of like content of that thing. But I'm just imagining a lot of abstract sort of detail,
Ways to communicate
To the app.
to the rest of it. Yeah. So
like you're navigating abstract.
with the conversation agent being the main focus, we can ignore context switching. We can ignore
The abstract stuff.
we can ignore like your profile settings. We can ignore like everything that doesn't fit into you're already an agent. You are in communication with other agents, which is our scenario. We can ignore everything outside of that. And yeah, this is a very big problem. Not problem from the perspective of like we need to resolve it, but we need to instill its premise in every single guild member, so to speak. That
Mm-hmm.
the right side is by default is what's open.
Right.
When the left
Yeah,
side
yeah, yeah.
opens up, it's
then
not immune to the problem.
This reminds me of growing up, raised into a family who gives you what you demand, and then at some point the switch happens, the supply-demand switch, and you are into the market. You're a market player. You're not in the family anymore. And
And it's all about what you can supply.
that is a total, like, from one side on the left as a polymorphic machine, if you will, and on the right the market machine.
That is actually what is happening. Is that your model is being
Uprooted.
uprooted through conceit to allow for the rest of the left side of the diagram to run its course.
The right side.
So yeah, you would be naturally, quote unquote, born into the conceitless side of it.
Right, and we learn and learn and learn until we're finally ready to jump over to market. Right, and that's when you jump
until
out of the family.
And so you have all of these abstract narratives that bootstrap
Yeah, over time.
the left side, and all of a sudden now you're just plugging into it instead of feeling like you're manipulated. You're feeling like you're plugging into something bigger than yourself instead.
Mm-hmm.
Complete fuckery. Of our,
Welcome to the machine.
enter the polyverse.
Right. Return to the polyverse.
Now, quick question. With all of this background information, I say agent, I say conversation, I say message, I say lobby, I say things like agents, they talk to each other. By starting and initiating conversations with other agents. conversations ordered by timestamp as far as messages go. Um, all the messages are created by the participants of the conversation. All make sense?
All natural sounding.
Message, a unique entry by an agent with a unique hypertext.
And I like to think of the Garden Guild example, like the Garden Guild lobby.
Let's step it back to like just not even having a purpose, just being together.
Of course, but in order to give it
Just
a
being
context,
yeah,
for,
but just
to
but,
think
but just
about.
for being a group. So a message, a unique hypertext entry. See what I'm doing there? By being hypertext, it means it can refer to other media. So like when you post a post on Reddit, you can
Yeah.
insert pictures,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can
yeah.
insert videos, whatever.
You're saying the content of the text isn't just the text itself, but
It's a hypermedia content of message.
Fractal.
That is associated with 0 or more conversations. So a message can be sent to either no conversation, a conversation, or multiple conversations.
right.
All of that still makes sense? And
Yeah.
the lobby, the central feed of all the messages from all conversations at the same time. Are any of those components not understandable as a concept?
They sound pretty understandable.
So we're arriving at what's called a ubiquitous language for the domain. Conversation, message.
Yeah, this is
agent.
the self-similarity that we've been talking about. That's what ubiquitous it means in this context.
Yeah.
Self-similarity.
So you can speak this language as a non-tech individual. When I say agent starts conversations with each other and you're not a technical person, what do you think of it? Agents starting conversations with each other,
sort of.
like literally.
Yeah, with not much else, but that's what it is. There's not much else right now.
And instinctively, you know, conversations will start and end. Nothing there that's technical.
So, like, we'll bring it back to the garden example of a guardian, if you will, agency, in which you identify pest objects and have protocols for removing them. Right? Either, let's say, moles can be, you plant garlic so they don't like it, they don't come around. Or as a cat,
Check this out.
you kill that shit.
Check this out.
Same
I'll
thing.
give you
same,
I'll give you the flow. Check this out. You enter your lobby into the garden. You're in the garden
Yeah.
lobby. Agents. You broadcast a message to the lobby. Pests. Such and such location. Blah blah blah. People associated with location, agents associated with location, start conversation with you.
pest. This is a demand.
Who is the problem? What is the problem? What's
Hold
the
on,
what's the extent of the problem? They're
Sure.
trying to get all that information
Ideally.
out of it.
Yeah. This is the institution would play that role of trying to get all the information out. If you just say pest,
Right, like
it's the job of the institution to format that in a way that the network will understand it.
So part of the idea of the broadcast into the lobby is you don't know what the conversation you should be having is. So by introducing a problem into the space, you're introducing a demand. Anybody who can supply for the demand is now going to query you. That can be a conversation. In that conversation, only the relevant parties are involved. There's no noise. Because somebody else could post for another problem and another conversation starts. And so on and so forth and so forth until the problem is resolved. So your pest problem can be like addressed by the main guild, and then in the main guild you will have pest responsible people starting a conversation about that, saying, "Oh, wait a minute, what's going on? Which pest? What's going on? Like, where is my service needed?"
You were just saying, like, if I'm gonna make a generic message, it's gonna go to the lobby as a shitpost basically, but that means everybody sees it, and it's like
At a relevant party.
everybody has a right to spam the lobby basically.
So one of the agencies in that lobby would be like your pest control supplier. So the whole company becomes an agent in the conversation. So that means if you are in a conversation with that agency, it means everybody in the space of pest control is not privy to it. And some people like the idea of me and you being represented by a single dashboard. That same idea is going to come up here, where they're going to respond to that as a unified
Messages
force.
put into the lobby should get tagged, I would think, with, say, the pest tag. But, like, if people you trust are, like, you say pest, that creates a conversation in a way. That conversation is about what? Okay, it's moles. So moles, that's one of them. The tags, if you will.
Solution that doesn't involve user knowledge much.
Still.
You're instead of being forced to post directly into the lobby, you're forced to say make a forum post defining your problem into a specific category of.
This is the job of the institution partially, to help you formulate that. That's as I understood it.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time getting away from the broadcast engine, but what's happening here is that in this case, you walk into the lobby and you make the post generic to everybody that says such and such a place has such and such problem, blah 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 blah, requires such and such assistance. It's going to show up on every dashboard.
It could be a picture of your vegetable chewed out.
Yeah,
with like rat teeth looking marks.
It becomes then the responsibility of the other.
And it's every member of that
corporation.
domain, every agent, let's say,
see it.
in that domain, has a right, quote unquote, to broadcast right to the domain lobby, if you want to. If you don't know where it goes, everybody should spam the fuck out of the lobby.
But think about forums. They're topical. So you're forced to post your message into a specific topic. One of those topics can be pest problems. Because of that, it becomes its own
and things are obvious.
Segregated lobby.
What I'm saying is kind of extreme if you really don't know where it goes. But obviously you're in a garden guild, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be in at least the garden lobby.
Shall we?
Yeah.
We are past the time.
Past over time. So let's pack it up. But that was a great session.
Mm-hmm.
And we shall pick it up in a couple weeks, I'm sure. And with that, we shall see you next time.